beginning with verse 1. Jesus looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow who put in 2 small copper coins. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on." The Gospel of the Lord. I think we know this story very well. It's a familiar story, a short story. It's a story that comes to us only from 2 Gospels, from Mark chapter 12 and here in Luke chapter 21. If you go back a couple chapters in Luke to chapter 19, you hear that it's the story of Palm Sunday. So we know that this story then takes place in the midst of Holy Week. Or back then it was the Jewish festival of Passover. And so from the cities and the rural areas from all over the ancient world, people were streaming to Jerusalem to celebrate this great festival of Passover. Jerusalem was filling up with people eager with anticipation. Jesus enters the city with his disciples, and crowds of people are gathering around him to worship, but then to listen to this rabbi's teachings as well. The scholars who look at the order of events for what happened during Holy Week maybe think that this little story of the widow's mite might have happened on the Tuesday of Holy Week. Jesus steps into the courtyard of the women, where the Israelite women were permitted to worship, and he watches as the crowds of people place their offerings in one of the 13 chests or treasury baskets that were scattered throughout that area. And amidst that busy scene comes a woman in ordinary clothes of a Palestinian peasant, no doubt. And Jesus sees this poor woman reach out and place with her hands 2 small copper coins in the offering. It's worth maybe a penny, if that much. And Jesus calls his disciples together and says, "I have something very important to tell you. That woman has given more than all of the other people you have seen streaming in and out of the temple." I'm sure the disciples were amazed, as you and I would have been, and maybe we are right now. For Jesus' words back then and today don't compute in our way of accounting. How could 2 thin, little, tiny pieces of copper, both worth probably less than a penny, be more than all the other offerings combined? God's system of accounting is sure different than ours. Well, look at verses 3 and 4. Jesus explains it. And I'm going to read it from the Good News translation. "I tell you that this poor widow put in more in the offering box than all the others, for the others put in what they had to spare of their riches. But she, poor as she is, put in all she had. She gave all she had to live on." Perhaps it is that the greatest gift that we could give is the gift that costs us the most. And by those standards, then Jesus' accounting was correct. The point of the story is clear, but then how do we apply that to our lives becomes pretty difficult. How would we give as that woman gave? One question that we can ask ourselves is, what motivated her to give as she gave? Or what made her that kind of a giving person? Today, on this first of 2 weekends with our Gifts of Hope emphasis, we focus our attention on 3 aspects of this woman's life, which might help us to understand the joy of her giving, and then shine some light on us that we too might see and to know the joy of giving as well. First of all, and you have an outline, a 3-part outline. I did this for the acolytes, 3-part outline in your bulletin. First of all, to be a giving person, We must have a level of understanding the needs of people. So if you're filling in the blanks, the first part of the three-part outline would be an understanding mind. M-I-N-D, a mind. An understanding mind. This woman was a widow, and in Jesus' day there was no Social Security, there was no pension plan. In the Old Testament, over and over again, people are encouraged and exhorted to care for the widows and the orphans. They were protected by the law. Israel was constantly reminded to remember them and never forget their needs. So this widow was a person who knew, who understood what it meant to be a person in need. If one does not understand the need, one is not likely to give. I received permission to tell this next story. Celia Squires from our Ascension School 5th grade class understands the need of our Gifts of Hope for Zambia. In the past couple of weeks in our newsletter, you've been reading about Gifts of Hope for Zambia. And Celia wrote, I gave a jar of my money to Zambia for the churches so that they could help cure the people with malaria. I gave my money because I really felt bad for the people with malaria. And if I know I can make a difference so easily, I will try my best to do it. Malaria is a horrible disease that we can rid the world of if we all work together in helping others. We have already made a big difference, but a lot of people still die every day of malaria. There are kids who don't even know how to talk before they die of malaria. We can all work together, so why don't we? Thank you, Celia. An understanding mind is the first part of the joy of giving, of one's willingness to give. And that's why we invited Caitlin LeBron from Many Mansions to tell us about the needs from our local Gifts of Hope project. This year we're focusing, and especially today, we're focusing on Many Mansions. Did you know the story of the very beginning of Many Mansions here in Thousand Oaks? It was in the late 70s. Our church predecessor body. Now, right today we are part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the ELCA. But what was Ascension Lutheran Church before we were ELCA? We were ALC, that is, we were part of the American Lutheran Church. And some pastors and people in Thousand Oaks here wrote a grant request to the American Lutheran Church to start Many Mansions in the late 70s. And our American Lutheran Church gave a check for $15,000, and that was the seed money for Many Mansions that started back in 1979. And so from the very beginning, Lutheran Christians in our community have been part of this important ecumenical low-cost housing ministry in Thousand Oaks that is now spread to different places in Ventura County. You'll hear from Caitlin at the end of the service. And so when you hear stories like this of missions near and missions far, when you read stories in the Lutheran magazine, a recent one I love the stories about Namibia. Ever since my seminary days, I've had a passion for the people of Namibia, because did you know that half of the people in Namibia, in southern Africa, half of them are Lutheran? We have a strong presence in the country of Namibia. Whereas other people read stories on the elca.org website, we understand better what the needs of our community and of our church are. But simply knowing about or understanding the need is not enough. It takes more than understanding mind to be a giving person. It's obvious from our gospel story that this woman, this widow, also had a compassionate heart. That would be point number 2. She had a compassionate heart. What else would have motivated her to give the way that she gave? She gave, and she gave sacrificially because she cared and she had compassion. That woman had no doubt had gone through very tough times in life, being poor and being a widow in that day. And we know too, at different times in our lives, that tough times